They say grief hits hardest when the noise fades. But for me, the silence wasn't what broke me. It was the way my children looked at me the day after we buried their father, as if I had become the last item on a checklist, something to be sorted, handled, stored away. I wasn't ready to lose Richard, but I had braced for that storm. What I hadn't prepared for was being discarded like leftover mail. My name is Martha Leigh. I'm 68 years old, a mother of 3, and until recently, a wife of 45 years. This is the story of how I lost everything and found more than I ever expected. We were married for 45 years. He made coffee every morning, humming that same awful Sinatra tune no matter the season. We fought about groceries and grandkids and politics, but he was my world. When the cancer took him, it felt like my skin peeled away too. I expected my children to gather close, maybe linger. Instead, they hovered like guests overstaying a visit, impatient to get back to their real lives. The morning after the funeral, I sat at the kitchen table with 3 coffee mugs in front of me. I had poured for Ava, David, and Mark. Habit, I guess. We used to sit there together every Sunday. I'd make blueberry pancakes, Richard would read the paper out loud, and the kids would interrupt with stories from their lives. That morning, no one touched the coffee. Mark cleared his throat like a man about to deliver bad news at work. "Mum, we've been thinking." That's how it began, like a merger or a property sale. David chimed in with his signature faux concerned voice, the one he used when asking for money back in college. He said maybe it was time I considered a community. Ava avoided my eyes, completely busy folding a napkin into triangles like it was the most important task in the world. I asked what they meant. Ava finally spoke. "A retirement home," she said, but not in a bad way. One of those nice ones, with activities. And people my age. I remember feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. I couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. I just stared at the table where Richard used to tap his spoon twice before stirring. David reached into his backpack and pulled out a brochure. Glossy. Smiling, grey-haired couples playing bocce ball and sipping iced tea. Ava said it was close to the beach. Mark mentioned it had on-site healthcare. I said nothing. I don't even remember standing up. Just that I was in our bedroom folding socks that didn't match, and wondering when my family had stopped seeing me as their mother and started seeing me as a problem. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't senile. I could still drive cook and fix the Wi-Fi router when it acted up. But none of that mattered. Not when they had decided. The next day, Ava came alone. She brought soup I didn't ask for, and a folder with information I didn't want. She said gently that it was temporary, that I could come back if I didn't like it. But her eyes said otherwise. I walked her to the door, every step heavy like betrayal. She hugged me too tightly and too fast. And then she was gone. I stood there holding the doorknob, staring at the empty driveway. It was the same place where Richard had taught Mark how to change a tire, the same place where Ava had spilled prom glitter all over the sidewalk. But that day, it was just concrete and cold wind. I made tea that night, 1 cup. I sat in Richard's recliner, still faintly smelling of aftershave. The house creaked around me like it was trying to say something, maybe warning me, maybe mourn with me. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and tried not to cry, but grief has sharp elbows. It jabs when you think you're fine. The next week passed in a blur. Appointments, evaluations, boxes. They packed my things in silence like movers clearing out an estate. They left my wedding album, though, said it was heavy. I tucked it under my arm like a shield. On the ride to the facility, Ava drove. She played classical music too loud and too cheerful. I stared out the window, watching the trees blur, feeling like I was being erased in real time. My name wasn't on any decisions. My opinion wasn't asked. I was cargo. When we arrived, a young woman in scrubs greeted me with a smile so big it hurt. She said, "Welcome." I wanted to scream, but I just nodded. I was too tired to fight. That first night in the room, I lay on a bed that wasn't mine, in sheets that smelled like bleach. I held my breath until Ava left. When the door clicked shut, I let the tears come. Not quiet ones. Loud, gasping sobs. Because that was the moment I knew. My children had buried more than their father that week. They buried me too, and they didn't even notice. It happened 4 days after the funeral, just when I thought the worst part was behind me. Mark showed up alone this time, wearing his polished office smile and that grey blazer he always pulls out for serious conversations. He didn't even sit down before handing me a folder and saying real casual that we should talk about the house. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I could already feel what it was before he spoke again, something about fair market value and how it might be a good time to sell. I blinked at him, trying to match the man in front of me with the boy who once cried because his goldfish died. He kept talking numbers and timelines, explaining how the proceeds could be split, how it would help me feel less tied down. I remember wondering if he heard himself. Less tied down, as if roots were a burden. He pointed to the kitchen counter and mentioned how the tile could use an upgrade. Said the place had great bones, but needed modernizing to appeal to younger buyers. I stared at that tile. Richard laid it by hand. Every crooked edge held a memory. But to Mark, it was just dated decor. I asked if he was serious. He said he was being practical. That's what he always says when he's about to do something cruel with a spreadsheet in hand. He said the market was hot. Said the equity could cover my care for years. He used the word asset instead of home. That's when I stopped listening. He didn't even ask if I was okay living somewhere else. He just assumed, like I was a piece of property to be relocated for convenience. I felt my fingers curl around the armrest, holding on like I might fall if I didn't anchor myself. When he left, he patted my shoulder like he'd just delivered a weather report. Then he smiled and said he'd run the numbers before calling his realtor friend. I waited until the front door shut before I allowed my face to break. Not from sadness, from shame. Because for a few minutes I had questioned myself, wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe I really didn't belong in my own life anymore. The attic smelled like dust and old paper, the kind of scent that lives in the folds of forgotten things. I hadn't gone up there since before Richard got sick. It was too hot, too cramped, too full of the life we built. But that day, something pulled me there like a thread, tugging on the last bit of what I still called mine. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. Maybe just trying to find a reason not to cry. I climbed the steps, slowly, every creak underfoot, sounding like a warning. The light bulb flickered when I pulled the string, casting long shadows over the boxes and old trunks. I reached for the cedar chest we kept wedding photos in, and there, tucked under a stack of letters and yellowed birthday cards, was a plain white envelope with my name in Richard's handwriting. I knew that curve. The way he wrote the L in Leigh, always a little too tall. My hands trembled as I opened it, the paper soft with time. It wasn't long, just a single sheet. But each word landed like a stone in my chest. He wrote it a few months before he passed. Said he had a feeling the kids might not see me the way he did. Said they loved me in their way, but they didn't understand roots or legacy. Said he saw the way Mark eyed the house after dinner one night, calculating something. And then the words that stopped my breath. Don't let them take this from you. Not the bricks, not the memories, not your place in the world. I sat back against a box of old curtains and let the tears come. This time they weren't from sadness. They came from recognition. Richard had seen it too. The slow erosion of respect. The quiet way the world starts treating older women like clutter. He ended the letter with a line I read out loud like I needed to hear it in the air. If they forget who you are, remind them. You're more than a name on a deed. You're the one who built it. I folded the letter and placed it in my pocket like armor. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something steady inside me. Not grief, not fear. Resolve. His stall was tucked between a honey vendor and a woman selling crocheted baby hats. I almost didn't see him at first, but there he was, in a navy apron, hands deep in a bucket of tulips, humming, like he didn't used to scare district attorneys for a living. Jim Thornton. We hadn't spoken in years, not since his wife's funeral. He was Richard's college roommate, our best man, and for decades one of the toughest elder law attorneys in the county. Now he was arranging daisies like a man reborn. I cleared my throat. He looked up, squinted, and then smiled like he'd been waiting for me all along. He pulled off his gloves and gave me the kind of hug you don't forget. We talked for a while about nothing catching up in bits and pieces, but he could tell I hadn't come for daffodils. When I finally told him why I was there, his eyes narrowed like they used to in court. I handed him the letter, the deed, and the folders Ava had left behind. He didn't say much at first, just nodded and laid everything out on a folding table covered in pollen. "You didn't sign anything giving up the title," he said after a moment. "That's good." But then he picked up the medical documents. Durable power of attorney. They can make health decisions, but not financial ones, not unless you give them that separately. I hadn't. I remembered Richard making me promise never to, no matter how persuasive Mark got. He glanced up at me, half a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You've got more leverage than they think. That house is yours, and if you want to keep it or sell it, that's your call." I nodded, trying to keep my hands from shaking. The breeze carried the scent of lilies and lavender. Somewhere behind us, a child was laughing at a duck-shaped balloon. Jim offered to help, said he still kept a few contacts just in case the law called him back. He tucked my documents into a weathered leather satchel and told me to meet him Monday at a notary's office near the courthouse. "Bring your ID," he said, "and wear something you feel strong in. You're not going in as a victim. You're going in as the rightful owner." I left the market with a bouquet of sunflowers and something else I hadn't felt in months. Agency. Not hope. Not yet. But a sense that maybe I wasn't as powerless as they wanted me to believe. The night I left, the moon hung low like it was watching me pack. I moved through the house in silence, barefoot, careful not to wake the floorboards. Every creak felt like a goodbye, every drawer like a final conversation I hadn't asked for. I didn't take much, just the essentials. One suitcase, a few changes of clothes, my wedding ring, and the letter Richard wrote. I slipped it into the inside pocket of my coat near my heart, where it had always belonged. The rest I left behind. Photographs. Furniture that ridiculous ceramic rooster Mark always said was tacky. Let them divide the spoils. I didn't want the things. I wanted my life back. I wrote the note and the kitchen table, the same place Mark had handed me the real estate brochure. My handwriting shook, not from fear, but from the weight of what it meant. I kept it short, just one line. I was never yours to discard. I propped it against the salt shaker right next to the mug that still had Richard's initials. Then I turned off the lights. Not all of them. Just enough to leave the place dim and soft, like the way you leave a room when someone's still sleeping. The car Jim arranged pulled up at 3 a.m. It wasn't a cab or an Uber, just a quiet grey sedan with a woman named Celeste behind the wheel, who nodded when she saw me and opened the trunk without a word. We didn't speak much on the ride. She handed me a bottle of water and let the radio play softly. Norah Jones. Something slow and easy. Outside, the road stretched dark and endless, like a ribbon tied to somewhere I hadn't met yet. The train station was nearly empty. I had bought the ticket in cash under a name I hadn't used in years. Martha Louise Beck, my grandmother's name. It felt right. The train to Ashford Bay pulled in just after 4, its lights glowing through the fog. I stepped inside and didn't look back. The ride was quiet. Fields rolled past the windows, then trees, then open stretches of nothing. I watched the sky turn from black to deep blue, to gold. The kind of morning that makes you think maybe you can begin again. When we arrived, the sea air hit me like a baptism. I stood on the platform with my suitcase in one hand and the future in the other. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. But something inside me unclenched. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was freedom, and that was enough for now. Ashford Bay was quiet in the mornings, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own breath, your own thoughts. I rented a small room above a bookstore just 2 blocks from the pier. The window faced east, and every morning the sun slipped in like an old friend. I spent the first week just walking, trying to figure out who I was without anyone needing me. That's how I found the bakery. A little blue-painted place with ivy creeping over the awning and a crooked sign that read, "Second Rise." The smell hit me before the door did cinnamon coffee and something warm I hadn't felt in months. Inside, a woman with silver curls and bright yellow earrings handed me a blueberry scone before I said a word. "You look like someone who needs this," she said. And she was right. Her name was Jo, retired nurse, widowed twice, called everyone sweetheart and cursed under her breath when the register jammed. She introduced me to Lena, who wore overalls and sang Billie Holiday while kneading dough, and to Florence, who only spoke when necessary but had a smile that made you feel safe. They didn't ask why I was there. They just slid me a cup of coffee and pulled up a chair. At first, I came in just to sit, a quiet place to not think. Then one morning, Jo asked if I knew how to fold pastry dough. I said I did. By the next week, I had an apron and a stool by the prep table. We weren't fast, but we were steady. We told stories between batches, laughed about things I hadn't remembered in years. They had all been through something. Lena's daughter hadn't spoken to her in 6 years. Florence had lost her home in a divorce and never remarried. Jo said her son lived 2 states away and only called when he needed money. But in that bakery, none of us was what we had lost. We were who we chose to be, makers of bread, sharers of warmth, a little messy, a little broken, but still rising. On Sundays, we left the shop open late. Locals stopped by for coffee and conversation. Sometimes we played cards. Sometimes we didn't speak at all, just sat and let the silence hold us. I hadn't realized how much I needed that. Not just a place, but people. A small tribe of women who had been pushed aside and still chose joy anyway. We didn't call it healing. That felt too big. But I knew I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't discarded. I was part of something, and that was more powerful than any apology I ever got. It started with a blueberry muffin. A young woman in a leather jacket came into the bakery one Thursday morning, ordered 2 coffees, and asked if she could sit near the window. She had a recorder tucked into her coat pocket and a curious energy, the kind that makes you feel seen even when you don't want to be. Her name was Ellie Marks, freelance journalist. Said she was working on a story about women over 60 starting over. I laughed and told her she was in the right place. Jo poured her a refill and winked at me. I didn't know then that one conversation would change everything. Ellie came back the next day, then the next. She never pushed, just asked quiet questions in between bites of scone. I told her about Richard, about the letter, about the note I left on the kitchen table. She listened like it mattered, like I mattered. And when she asked if she could record it, I said yes. She didn't edit much, just layered my voice over soft piano and seagulls she recorded outside the shop. The episode was called The Woman Who Walked Away. It went live on a Tuesday. By Thursday, our phone at the bakery wouldn't stop ringing. Emails poured in, from women in their 70s, 80s, and even 90s. Some are still stuck in homes they didn't choose. Some with daughters who hadn't called in years. Some just need to say me too. They called me brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt lucky. Lucky to have left. Lucky to be heard. People sent donations to the shop. Joe nearly cried when a check for $500 arrived with a note that said, "Use this to keep rising." Ellie wrote a follow-up article. Bigger publications called. She said no to most of them. Said she didn't want the story watered down. It belonged to us, not to headlines. Lena printed out some of the letters and hung them on the bakery wall. Florence read them every morning before we started dough. And I started to believe that maybe sharing what hurt could be healing too. Not just for me, for someone else, for a lot of someone's. It was the first time I realized this wasn't just my story anymore. It was a thread in something larger, a tapestry of women who had been told to sit still, be quiet, and fade gently, and instead we baked, we spoke, we rose. She showed up on a Wednesday right before closing. The bell above the door rang, and I looked up from wiping down the counter. For a moment, I didn't recognize her. Ava had always been the quiet one, the gentlest. But that day, she looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Eyes rimmed red, shoulders hunched, like someone carrying too much and not sure where to put it. I froze. My first instinct was to run to the back. My second was to yell. Instead, I just stood there, cloth still in my hand, heart thudding like a drum. She spoke first. "Mum," she said, voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." That's when I knew she'd heard the podcast. Joe gave me a look from the kitchen and slipped out the side door without a word. Ava walked slowly like she was afraid I'd vanish. I gestured to a stool, then turned to pour her a cup of coffee. It felt strange, automatic, like we were playing house after years of silence. We sat across from each other, the counter between us, like a wall made of years. She wrapped her hands around the mug and stared into it like it held answers. I didn't speak. I wanted to. I didn't trust my voice. She finally looked up. "I didn't know what they did, Mom, I swear. Karen cut me off from you. Told me you were fine, that you didn't want to talk." She paused. Said I should focus on my life. But I kept wondering why you never called me back. Why did your number stop working? I blinked hard, my throat tight. I had tried to call her. I left voicemails until the line disconnected. Ava reached into her bag and pulled out a worn piece of paper. It was the transcript of the podcast, printed and underlined. "I found this online. I listened 3 times. Then I packed a bag and came straight here. I had to know if it was true. If you were really gone." I wanted to tell her everything at once, but I also wanted her to sit in that pain a little. Not to punish her, but to let the weight of what happened settle. Instead, I said, "You look tired." She laughed, a wet, broken sound. "I haven't slept right since I heard your voice again. We talked for hours. About everything. About Karen and the way she took over after Richard died. About Mark and his spreadsheets and cold logic. About David, who hadn't spoken to any of us in years, unless it was about money. Ava told me she had tried to fight it at first, had asked too many questions. Karen didn't like that. So she was pushed out just like I had been. I told her what I had done. About the letter, the note, the drive in the middle of the night. About the bakery. Her eyes filled with tears when I mentioned Joe and Lena and Florence. "You found a way out," she said quietly. "You saved yourself." I nodded. "And now I'm building something new." She reached across the counter and took my hand, the first touch in over a year. "I want to help Mum, however you'll let me." I stared at her hand, smaller than mine, but steady, warm, honest. Maybe it was too soon. Maybe it wasn't enough. But I felt something shift. A door cracked open. I squeezed her fingers and whispered, "Okay, but slowly, one step at a time." She nodded, eyes shining. "That's all I ask." The bell above the door rang again. Joe peeked her head in, saw us, and smiled without saying a word. And just like that, my world tilted a little closer to whole. We called it Leigh's Light. It started as a sketch on the back of a napkin, just me and Ava at a diner with too much coffee and not enough sleep. We wanted to create something for the women who didn't have a gym or a Joe or a bakery to fall into, a place where no one would be treated like they were finished just because they'd been forgotten. The mission was simple: to help older women reclaim what was theirs, their money, their rights, their voices. We partnered with small law firms, hosted community workshops, and opened a helpline. Ava handled the structure, I handled the stories. And somewhere along the way, we became something we hadn't been in years: a team. People started calling from all over the country. Women who had been silenced, women who had been used, women who had never said out loud what had happened to them. We didn't fix everything, but we gave them a light to walk toward. That's all I had ever wanted. I wrote my story too. Not just the pain, the parts I remembered, the parts they tried to erase. We titled it, I Remembered Myself. Not because I ever truly forgot, but because I let too many people tell me who I wasn't. That stops now. If you're listening to this, if you feel like no one sees you, let me say this plainly. You are not done. You are not too late. There is something in you still burning, even if it's just an ember. Protect it, feed it, let it grow. Because the day I walked away, I didn't lose everything. I found something I didn't know I still had. A future. One that I made with my own two hands.